you don't necessarily associate cooking with cognitive advancement, but there's a lot of great things that happen in our brain when we cook. Hi, and welcome. I'm so excited that you're here. And we have another amazing episode for you today. And it's a new month. Welcome to December 2023. And this month we are focusing all on cooking and meal prep because this time of year, everyone is doing a lot of cooking, no matter what culture or religious background you come from. A lot of traditions are happening at this time of year, and that tend to involve a lot of cooking. So here we are. And if you have not already, please make sure you subscribe so you don't miss an episode. We put out new content every single week to help you and your family make meal times easier and stress-free. So let's dive right in. So today's episode is really focusing on the bigger benefits of cooking, like outside of how it can help our picky eaters. It's actually really, really good for brain development and cognitive abilities. So I'm going to sort of break down to you some of these brain benefits. So there are 7 that I've come up with. And I think you might even not even have thought of it in this way before, because I know, I didn't necessarily, you don't necessarily associate cooking with cognitive advancement, but there's a lot of great things that happen in our brain when we cook. And cooking, just like eating, is a fairly complex task, but it's a lot of work for our brain to do. But it also means that it's kind of strengthening a lot of those skills. So let's dive right in. So number 1 is improved fine motor skills. So fine motor skills are things like chopping, mixing, measuring, might be peeling. Like if you can imagine taking a hard-boiled egg and peeling off of all of those little pieces of the shell, that's an incredible fine motor task, right? Even things like chopping, um, that is like those 2 things alone could be just wonderful for your child. And don't always think chopping has to be a dangerous activity. There are lots of kid-safe knives that will not cut their fingers. Right. So it doesn't have to be like, oh, well, I can't have them chop because they're too young and it's too dangerous. Right. There are wooden ones, there are plastic ones, like these nylon ones that you probably have seen on Amazon. I'll actually link them below, but they're super kid friendly and safe, and they're a great option. So, you don't have to hold them back from chopping and cutting it just because of knives. Right. Actually, teaching them knife safety from an early age is a really good life skill. I didn't learn how to use a knife properly until my sister went to culinary school, and she showed me how to cut. And she was like, "Oh no, when you do it this other way, like the way I was doing it, you can actually get very hurt. So please hold the knife, this way." And it was like at the end of the knife, not like, pushing it down in the middle. So the important thing there is that knife skills and kitchen safety, that can be a part of it, but it definitely should not hold you or your child back from participating in cooking that way. And also just thinking like hand-eye coordination, like things like pouring and mixing, is really great, right? So our brain is kind of taking all that in and practicing when we're cooking. All right, now, number 2, executive functioning. Now, some people might not have heard that word before, but you know exactly what it is. So executive functioning kind of refers to a group of skills. And this is, I guess maybe you can call it a speech therapy term. That is a term that we use when we are working with kids for language. But what it is things like being able to remember instructions in a sequential order, planning out what you need, being able to manage your time, following directions, whether simple or complex, can fall under that. So these all of the skills and all of the things that you're doing in cooking encompass that executive planning piece. And that was something that we worked on. And a lot of our kids, when I was a speech therapist in a school, a lot of kids actually really struggled with executive functioning because it's a higher level cognitive task. But cooking actually is a great way to work on all of those skills, and in a fun way, not in a difficult or challenging way. They're having fun while doing it. Okay, so that is number 2, executive functioning. And number 3, this one was probably going to come as no surprise, but math, and more specifically, real world math. Things like measuring weight, temperatures, even, adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing, doing fractions, um, and budgeting. So all of those are really, really important. Sorry, that keeps going off. Even budgeting, right? So if we're talking about planning out a recipe, and we say we have $15 to spend, this costs X, this costs Y, how much money do we have left over, right? So those are all sort of real world applications of using math in very like concrete and tangible ways. So I find that even kids that don't like math or struggle with math, they find that doing it through cooking is a more like approachable, fun way for them to learn some of those concepts. Okay, and number 4, critical thinking skills, which is a really very, very essential life skill. um, Critical thinking, right? So when a challenge arises, can kids adapt or adjust, um, come up with an idea? So when you're cooking, things sometimes might come up that surprise us, like, oh wait, that didn't taste quite right, how could we adjust, how could we solve this problem? Or, oh, we spilled this egg, right, and we don't have another one, so how can we problem solve and make up for the loss of this egg, right? So those types of critical thinking skills will absolutely translate into other areas of their life. It kind of goes along with creativity, which is one I'll mention later, but specifically, kind of this adjustment that our brain has to do to adapt to an unexpected challenge or situation is really good. It also really helps with that flexible thinking that some of our kids who, even language wise, might struggle with things like, idioms or what else am I trying to think of? Idioms is a good one, like figurative language. Sorry, that's the word I was trying to come up with. That requires some flexible thinking and even some critical thinking about like, well, what else could that mean? Right. And that was, as a speech pathologist, something we were really focused on with our kids. And they would really need help in this area quite a bit. So cooking is a great way to work on critical thinking skills. Isn't that fun? All right. Now, I'm going to take a quick pause here to remind you that if your child is struggling and you're not even sure where to start, make sure you take our 2-minute quiz at Picky Eaters with an S, test.com. So that's www.pickyeaterstest.com. And that'll give you a great place on where you can start and some resources for whatever level your child is at, whether they're sort of mild or severe or someplace in between. So definitely check that out. Um, and let me just continue. Now, tip number 5, reading and vocabulary, is really great. Now, when you're doing cooking, there's lots of new terms that will come up. Even as an adult, I find that when I watch cooking shows, I'm like, wait, what did they just say? Or what is that food? Like, or it might be a way to describe how a certain food is cooked. Like, for example, I feel like this was a word I did not know when I was younger, but like sous vide, and it's something about like how it cooks in like a water, I believe. I've never made it, I've never eaten it, but I've heard of it, right? And that was something I learned a new vocabulary word as an adult, right? But there's a lot of vocabulary that comes with cooking. And sometimes it's food related, and sometimes it's using specific tools or specific techniques. But it really can expand our children's vocabulary and also help them to learn some new words in different languages. Because sometimes a word for a food is actually the name of that food in a different language. Um, right. So if you go to like a Mexican or a Spanish restaurant, a lot of those words for things like guacamole and quesadilla, those are actually Spanish words, right? And same in for Italian. If you go to an Italian restaurant, a lot of times, like for example, burrata is a type of cheese, and that's how they say it in Italy, and that's how they say it here, right? So you're learning when you learn about different foods from different cultures and different locations, you're also learning some of the language that goes with it. So cooking and tasting and trying recipes from different places can also be a great way to expand vocabulary. And reading, of course, reading the recipes. And, if your child isn't at the point where they're reading, they can still read in pictures. So recipes can be adapted, and there are many adapted recipes for non-readers or children who are nonverbal, but you can follow picture directions. So there might be 2 eggs on top, and then a measuring cup with exactly how much they need filled to a certain line. So there are ways to explain the needs of what the recipe calls for without them actually reading specific words, right? So if you're like, oh, well, they can't read a recipe, or might you be saying my child is, has severe autism and can't read, right? But we can show them pictures and they can follow picture recipes, and in a way that is sort of helping them to those are still like the building blocks of reading, is being able to look at a symbol, right? Because letters are symbols, looking at a picture symbol and understanding what that symbol means, and then corresponding it to a specific action, right? So the word eat, EAT, is technically, it's a word, but each letter is a symbol that somebody had come up with a very long time ago. So the E symbol stands for the sound, right? So it is all based in language and symbols. So we can adjust those symbols for someone who isn't able to do that set of symbols, right? If they can't do sounds and letters, we can do pictures. Just another option to think about, but definitely something doable. And something that I've done many times as a speech pathologist, we would adapt lessons to kids that couldn't read, and we would make it accessible to them with pictures. Sometimes they're real world pictures, and sometimes they're just images, or it might be like a number and a symbol, right? It depends on the child's ability level, but there are many ways to adapt a recipe for anyone to quote unquote read it. Um, Now, another one, now this is a super important one, is creativity. So, creativity is, they say, a lot of children are born very creative. And it's a skill that can sort of get, um, as they get older and they're taught a sort of a different way of thinking, that creativity can actually decrease over time. And we actually don't want that because the most successful, innovative, business owners, people that change the world, right? Think about the Steve Jobs of the world and the Jeff Bezos, right? They had to be creative, right? If you right, I always think back to I don't know if you've ever seen Forrest Gump, but there's a scene in there where he's giving Forrest advice about how he should invest in this fruit company called Apple, and it turned out to be like Apple products, right? And, of course, he made, a ton of money in the future on that, but, back then, no one ever thought that, that would become what it is today, right? Someone had to have that creative vision, right? Who would have thought, like, oh, people are going to shop online? No one's going to want to shop online. People love going to the store. Like, no, like, no one's going to trust something from the internet, right? And here we are with Amazon, where things get shipped to your house in sometimes the same day that you order them, somehow, like by magic. And someone had to be creative enough to see that and brave enough to make that happen and take action. So whether you like those brands or not doesn't matter. The point is that whoever created them was creative to some degree, right? That's like not even arguable, I don't think. But we want to foster that creativity. So doing things that help, can be happening in the kitchen. So, making things with different colors, different textures, and presentation of the food. Like, what does it look like when you put it on the plate? How can we make this more appealing or prettier or more colorful? What can we add to make this a little bit more exciting looking, right? So those are different ways that, even flavors, we can be creative with flavors as well. But those are different ways that we can keep that creativity spark alive in our young kids. And cooking is just, I find a creative outlet for myself. I love creating stuff in the kitchen. And like one of my favorite shows, and I highly recommend that you watch this with your kids as well. But Chopped is when they have like a box and there's different ingredients in there and they have to like make a dish using all of them. And I do stuff like that at home all the time because sometimes there's just leftovers and or just random ingredients. And I'm like, okay, how can I put all of these together and make it taste good? And that is an exercise in creativity right there. So that's something we could do with our kids too. And as they do more and more cooking, they'll be able to come up with more of these ideas and recipes on their own. And the more comfort level they have with ingredients, the more they'll be able to experiment and have things that do taste really good. Okay, so we've arrived at our very last tip um, for this week. Next week I actually have some different, more like social emotional ways that cooking and meal prep can affect children in a very positive way. But for the brain development portion, I have one tip left for you. Now, if you haven't already, just a quick reminder to subscribe to the channel or please comment below. I love to hear, if you knew some of these things, if you've seen some of this with your own children, if you've done this and how that's going. Or if you didn't know any of this before, was this information helpful? I love knowing that information that I put out there and content that I put out there is, being useful to other people. That really motivates me to continue to make more content and, be helpful, in the future. So last one is science. And There is nothing more scientific than food, right? Because food, when you're cooking food, it actually is a chemical reaction. And there's actually like a whole like course you can take on like food chemistry, and like people do very creative things using the principles of chemistry while they're cooking, and it makes food really very like an interesting taste. And I wish I could remember, but I had a student one time who was fascinated with cooking, literally wanted to drop out of school in middle school to become a professional chef. He loves it and was so passionate about it. And he showed me this book, and I thought it was really cool, but I haven't seen it since. So if I find it, I'll put it in the notes. But there is like a science to some of this creative cooking. But beyond that, some basic chemical reactions, just talking about like an action and a reaction, even things like safety, like think about when you're in science class, the first unit is always the safety unit. And that is also an important part of cooking as well. And even things like food storage and temperature, and how to safely store food at a correct temperature. Because, well, what happens chemically when the food is stored at an improper temperature, right? So, those are all great science related things that you can teach through cooking and through food. Right. So, these are really more general things. They're not really specific to our picky eaters at all. But of course, our picky eaters would benefit from all of these, just like a foodie child would benefit from these. And the more you do cooking with your kids, the easier it will be. So I hope this was helpful. Please let me know below, and I will see you next week.
Thank you for listening to How to Unpicky Your Picky Eater. To learn more about achieving your child's feeding goals, check out Christine's website at foodologyfeeding.com. And be sure to tune in next time to How to Unpicky Your Picky Eater.